Hi, Tom. Thank you so much for joining me today. We are here to talk about an important and exciting event that is happening this autumn in Huntsville, Alabama, called Doorway to the Future. And it is presented by the Center for the Unification of Science and Consciousness, which is your nonprofit dedicated to the scientific experiments being conducted right now in major universities, which if successful, could usher in a major paradigm shift in our understanding of the fundamental nature of reality. So we're going to take some time today to talk about what inspired the event, what you hope it will achieve, and how people can take part. And I'm really excited to dig in. So,
Great.
Tom, yeah, it is great. So,
Yeah.
Tom, you are a physicist and you worked in the field of physics your entire career, including at NASA. And simultaneously, you've been experientially exploring the realm of consciousness your entire adult life, and you pioneered modern research into altered states of consciousness. This puts you in a unique position to speak powerfully to both areas of exploration, the realm of objective science and the subjective realm of consciousness. So, my question to you right off the bat is, so why the unification of science and consciousness? Why is that important?
Well, it's important because science and consciousness can be unified. Now, most scientists would reject that idea. Science is science, and it's about the objective world. And consciousness, even if it exists, would be subjective and therefore not in the realm of things that science works on. Science only is interested in the objective. That is a very narrow idea. It's a very narrow concept of science. Um, there's a lot of science that goes on that's not squarely in the objective world, like all medical science, for instance. That's not so objective. It's mostly statistical, which isn't what hard science is all about. Hard science is not statistical. So also all the soft sciences like sociology, psychology, these are all soft sciences instead of hard sciences because they deal with the subjective world. Medicine's in there too. How do you know that a patient's, pain in their head has gotten better? The only way you can know that is ask the patient. And of course, 10 different patients with the same pain will tell you 10 different things because everybody processes pain differently. So medicine and sociology and the rest of those soft sciences deal with statistics. How do most people describe, certain levels of pain caused by certain specific things? So that's one step away from the hard science, but the intuition, the intuitive side of consciousness is an important part of consciousness. Now, look at it this way. If we look at all of the things that are important to us, significant in our life, the most important things, well, what would that be? Things like truth and justice and love and caring and relationship and satisfaction, all of that, peace, all of that's subjective. None of that falls in the subjective world. Um, big questions in your life where you need answers like should I marry Sally or should I marry Sue? Well, those affect a lot of people. That choice will make a big difference to many people, but that choice is going to be entirely subjective. So we come to the conclusion that the most interesting and most important part of our lives fall outside of what scientists would call science. And that part of our lives that is about the stuff, how many people can sleep in your house, how much does this weigh, how long is that? Well, that's all objective, but that's just the stuff. That's like the props in a play. Nobody goes to a play to watch the props. That's the props are there. They have their function. They make the story more interesting, but they're not really what's important. What's important is the story that's going on, the play, the drama. That's what's important. It's what's being said. And all of that is in the subjective realm, you see. So why would I look for a unification of the subjective and the objective of consciousness in science? Because it's important. That's where our life is lived, on that subjective side. And we understand so little of it. But there are rules on that subjective side. Rules that if you follow them, you certainly will find happiness and satisfaction, or struggle and dissatisfaction if you don't. So understanding with a logical, scientific method behind it, understanding with that kind of science behind it, in the subjective world is needed, desperately needed. And as it turns out, our reality that we call the physical universe is really explainable and, well, let me say that differently, is uh, actually a subset of consciousness. Consciousness turns out to be fundamental, not the physical world. So, with the physical world being a subset within consciousness, that opens up an awful lot of questions. Well, how does that work? How does consciousness, make a physical world? How does consciousness make mass, and so on? Well, my model is to answer all of those questions, to explain how our physical universe has come about, why it's come about, who are you, who am I, what's our purpose here. All of those things fall out of studying the unification of science and consciousness. And now my model is not the only model. There's lots of other people that are trying to mine this same vein or similar veins. And what this symposium is about, we're getting together to talk about our approaches, what we've learned, how things work, the experiments that we're working on. You mentioned I have a set of quantum physics experiments. Well, the first one of those has just started producing results about 2 weeks ago. So when I get to this meeting, I'm going to explain how all that came out and what does it mean. And so there'll be that, and I'll be explaining some of the other experiments that we're going to do. What's next? What are we going to do next? And hopefully we'll help encourage some donors to help fund that, because these experiments are very expensive.
Right.
So that's what it's about. But we're trying to make this more than just an intellectual knowledge fest. Symposiums tend to be that way. People come and they listen to lectures, and then they go back to their rooms and come out and listen to another lecture. But we want this to be more collegial than that. We want it to be people networking with each other, people talking and connecting and sharing and networking. We're trying to make it fun and interesting, as well as intellectually productive. We're going to have musicians wandering around. They may collect together and play, or they may just play in the lobby or in some of the rooms that we're using, or at mealtime. We're hoping to have partying at night. So when all the work is done, we will, crank up the sound system and just enjoy ourselves with music, dancing, whatever we feel like doing. So
Right.
this isn't the kind of symposium that you're probably used to. This is going to be very informative. We're having people talk about the future, what they're doing, things that they're planning, experiments they're planning to do, and what those experiments will tell us, and others talking about what they've accomplished already. But it should be very interesting. It should be exciting in the sense that you'll learn about some facts of reality that you didn't know before, that were invisible to you, some amazing things that'll make you do a double take. And you're going to meet a lot of interesting people. And most importantly, you're going to have fun. This
Mm.
symposium is about people, not just knowledge and sharing knowledge, but about people. So we're going to have a good time.
Well, that's a fantastic overview. I had a lot of questions for you, and you've jumped right in and started to answer all of them. It's wonderfully done. And, when you were talking about, the scientific experiments and the subjective science, right, of consciousness, it made me think that, this symposium is called the doorway to the future. And it really seems like the doorway to the future we really, really need is locked tight behind our current paradigm of survival and domination. I mean, really, uh, we give lip service to all these wonderful subjective values, but they play second fiddle to, you know, all the efforts that we make to stay in control of this world and the people that are in control. And so it seems to me to open this doorway to the future, it takes two keys, right? And you have called the physicists the cultural high priests because they tell us what to believe about fundamental reality. And you've asserted that reaching physicists with these ideas that you've put forward is critical to a transformation in our cultural mindset about what is real and what is possible. So we know that physicists don't change their minds based on philosophical discussions. It is the scientific method that is the bedrock of the
Mhm.
foundation for modern science. So I think that's key number one. These experiments, which you've already brushed on, that we're going to get to learn about at this symposium. That's key number one to open the doorway to the future. And then the second key seems to be, like you said, the individual consciousnesses, the people who are interested in your work, interested in the ideas of the other presenters that you're bringing in. Their passion and their willingness to evolve their consciousness seems like the second key that can open the doorway to the future. What do you think of that? Does that seem
Yes,
sparking up?
I think you're exactly right, Christine. To reach the scientists, you have to speak the language of science.
Mm,
To convince scientists that something is true, you have to do an experiment that shows that it is true. And that experiment has to be able to be done by anybody anywhere and come up with exactly the same answer. So that scientific method is important in order to get the attention of science. Yes, they're not real big on looking at the grandiose theories. They want to see the facts. And facts for a scientist are defined by experiments.
mm,
So that's why I designed these experiments. Now, there's not going to be any experiment that proves, anything really. You can't prove that consciousness exists. You can't prove that, relativity is a certain way, or quantum physics. Scientists don't talk really about proof and laws anymore. We learned that lesson with Newton.
mm,
Newton thought that he had a solution and understanding that would hold for all time. So he called his things laws, Newton's first and second and third law. And then, of course, we find out that they only hold in a little piece of space where you don't go too fast and you're not too big, not too small. So they were limited. They only are accurate in a subset of our reality. So they weren't really, universal laws at all. So that's why scientists talk about the theory of relativity and quantum theory. We find evidence, not proof.
mm.
Proof is, I've heard Dean Radin say, proof is for whiskey. Proof is for mathematicians. But science tries to gather evidence. And with that evidence, things become more or less likely, more or less probable. And if your evidence is real solid, then science will kind of accept that as a fact. Here's the evidence that this fact exists, and here's how this works. So my experiments will point out two things. One, that this is a virtual reality because things will happen in them that can only happen in a virtual reality. And it's going to show that uh, consciousness is the source of that virtual reality. Now, when I say it shows that, I mean it lends evidence to those ideas. But I have a whole set of experiments, and each one is a little different, and they all will lend some evidence. So there'll be quite a little stack of evidence when I'm done if things work out the way I hope. And I can tell you that from this first experiment, the results that have just come in, they have those results are exactly as I predicted. So
Mm.
that's good news. And I'm going to talk a whole lot more about that at the symposium. And I'm going to probably be making some videos that explain that, but that takes a lot of preparation, and I have to make a lot of slides and other things, so it's not going to be immediate, but it'll be in the near future.
Yeah, and I want to say if people want to prepare so they're really understanding those experiments, you have some terrific lectures that you filmed in LA in 2016. It's up on YouTube. It's about 7 hours explaining your ideas about these experiments. And it's really great listening. Sometimes it's hard for a layperson to follow, but you do a great job of laying it all out. And it's going to be very exciting then to start hearing about these results that are coming in,
Hmm.
gather in
Yes,
September.
and you know that particular video that covers 2 days. The first day, I talked all about, reality and how it works and the experiments. But the second day was not about science at all. It was about the soft side. The whole second day was dedicated to why should you care? All right. Most people don't go through their life worrying about things in physics. That's kind of esoteric and often a place where most people don't think about them or even know about them or care about them. But I wanted to answer that question. All right, I've talked about these experiments. I've talked about the nature of reality, the nature of consciousness. Now, why should you care? Why is it important to you? So I encourage people to listen to both days. Listen to the first day and look at the science that's gone into this. Look at the logic that explains it, and then listen to the second day that tells you why it makes a difference to your personal life, to your relationships, to the things that you hold dear. It affects those things and affects them dramatically. So, you know, I'd
Yeah,
hope that
and
people,
like you also for many of us who don't understand physics really, many of us are fascinated, but we don't understand it. But the truth is like you said, the physicists or the high priests of our culture, they tell us what to believe about fundamental reality. So as long as the physicists are coming out and they're so brilliant and they're so artistic and they're saying nothing's real but the material reality of this universe, there's nothing but that, we're going to stay stuck in this sort of deterministic mindset.
yes.
And so it actually really does matter what physicists think. They are really powerful movers in our cultural beliefs and mindset. And the MIT researcher Donella Meadows, she's a systems change expert, and she identified all these different acupuncture points that you can hit in a system that will change the system. And she says the very most powerful acupuncture point in changing a system is the willingness to change the paradigm that you believe in.
Hmm.
But it's the hardest one to achieve.
The
And
hardest one to achieve, yes. And the paradigm to jump from materialism to my model is huge. It's a really, really big paradigm shift, but it's very difficult as well. But it's not difficult because there's a lot of science and math. It's not difficult. Anybody with an average mind can easily understand it. Why it is so difficult is that it's so different. It's so different than what we have been led to believe all of our lives, what scientists have been led to believe. It's so different than their core beliefs. That's what makes it so hard to wrap your mind around it. Not that the concepts are so difficult, they're not. The concepts could be understood by anyone. But it's that, how big a step can you get a physicist to take? Well, at this point, we have a lot of scientists, particularly particle physicists, atomic physicists, who are saying that reality is information based because that's what their science is telling them. And they make up a lot of very strange stories to hold on to this idea that it's material based. But that just doesn't hold up to the experiments. All the experiments say our reality is information based, but they don't know what to do next. So, okay, it's information based. Now what? What step do we take? What does that mean? What conclusions can I draw from that? And they hit the wall there. They don't understand. And this is because they do not understand consciousness. And you have to understand consciousness before you can understand the significance of this being information based and how that fits together and why it has to be information based and what that means. And you can actually derive quantum physics from a knowledge of consciousness when you understand consciousness. You see, so that's the big step that we have to take. But you're right. If we're going to ever become mainstream with these ideas, we will have to do it through science. You cannot become mainstream with an idea such as ours without the scientists signing on to it. And that's going to take some time, but we're working on it. And conferences like this one are trying to lubricate that transition because we will have scientists there, we'll have physicists there, we'll have people there who are very skeptical, and that's great. We like people who are skeptical. Those are the kind of people that we most want to talk to.
Yeah,
So
it's
some of
a good
yeah.
moment, actually. Let's talk about some of the presenters because I've been following you for years and watching your talks, and
Mhm.
I often was thinking it would be so exciting to see him on stage with some other physicists really going at it and really digging in and taking these ideas apart. And we have a chance to see that live coming up very soon this autumn. And you have invited some fabulous presenters, and even more are coming. But let's cover a few of them right now to help people know who they will be experiencing. So one of these individuals you talk about in your 2016 LA presentations, his name is Donald Hoffman. He's a professor of cognitive sciences at UC Irvine with joint appointments in the Department of Logic and the Philosophy of Science and the School of Computer Science. He studies consciousness, visual perception, and evolutionary psychology using mathematical models. He's an author and public speaker, and his 2015 TED Talk, Do We See Reality as It Is, argues that our perceptions have evolved to hide reality from us. So, seeing that you talked about him in your 2016 lectures, I imagine it's going to be exciting to have him at the symposium and talk about these ideas. What do you hope to cover with Donald Hoffman? Or why are you
Well,
excited that he's coming?
well, Donald Hoffman is going to be a very good contributor because he comes very close to the same conclusions that I do. Just recently, I have heard him say that he thinks that consciousness is fundamental. Well, that's where I start.
Mm.
And the thing that's important about this is in science, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. You'd like to have people derive the same conclusions from different directions. And he comes from a totally different path than I do. So, he came out of, I think, MIT with computer science. He's a brilliant guy. He obviously um, knows his neurophysics, let's say. Maybe that's maybe not necessarily an academic term, but let's just call it neurophysics. And he's come to the conclusion that when we interact with this physical world, it's just like the way we interact with a Word document, that's being run on a Microsoft operating system. It's an interface. We interact with the physical world. It's just an interface. It's not the real thing. So he's saying the physical world is not the final thing. You have to look behind the curtain to see what's going on. Like if you had a computer and you're doing a Word document, to know what's really going on, you have to look behind the GUI interface and see what's going on with all those banks of transistors and with all those ones and zeros and all the rest of the electronics and functions that are back there. That will tell you what the reality is. What you see, the pretty pictures up on your screen because of the nice graphics based operating system, those are just ways to help us work with those details of ones and zeros in a way that's easy for us to do. It brings it up to pictures that we can deal with rather than long sequences of bits that are hard for us to express ourselves in terms of ones and zeros, but we can write in our native language very easily and let the computer convert all that to ones and zeros and deal with it. So that's his idea. It's like an interface. So we deal with the physical world, but that's not really the fundamental thing. There's something more fundamental behind that. So there's something back there. In my language, I would say that's computing that, just like the operating system computes your GUI, your graphical interface. Well, consciousness.
I just heard him say, I saw a video posted where he said, consciousness is fundamental and space-time reality is just a cheap VR headset. It was a pretty bold statement. Made me laugh.
Yes, yes, indeed. That's true. So yes, Donald Hoffman is going to come to many of the same conclusions I do, but he comes from a totally different space in a different direction. But by the time it's all said and done, you'll see that we mainly use different metaphors. We're seeing similar effects, you know, but we're describing it, and the direction we come from is just different. Well, that creates um, confidence in the accuracy of results. If you can get 4 or 5 people coming from very different directions, all descending into the same conclusions, that leads strength. That lends strength to the conclusions that you're talking about. And indeed, we'll find this at this symposium. There will be people who have reached similar conclusions. Some
Well,
are
can
just
we talk? Let's talk about one of them, which is Rizwan Virk.
okay.
He is an MIT trained computer scientist and a Silicon Valley entrepreneur. He's a futurist and a video game pioneer. He's also a best-selling author, and 2 of his books, The Simulation Hypothesis and The Simulated Multiverse, relate strongly to the core theme of this symposium. His ideas are very correlative with yours. So let's talk about why you invited him to join us in
Well,
September.
Ritzwan is a very dynamic guy. If you've ever talked with him and spent a little time with him, he's the epitome of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. He's smart. He's a good speaker, and he's been thinking about this for many years. This idea of virtual reality, and his ideas have evolved and changed from the first time that I looked at his first book to where he is now. He's grown and he's come to a lot of conclusions, and he's looking at the big picture and all the possibilities. He's not just focused on how this reality works, but he's focused on all the possibilities of how it might work. So he's got a very large viewpoint. And if you sort through all of those possibilities, it's pretty easy to see why most of them are difficult or impossible, or have you have to make big assumptions to get them to work. But if you hone in on just the ones that don't take very big assumptions and don't have any major problems, then he ends up pretty much the same place that I am. And that's another person who comes from different direction through a different kind of investigation, and ends up kind of being in the same basket. So again, it lends credibility to the concept. But I expect him to be a very dynamic speaker. I expect everybody in the audience to enjoy what he has to say. He's widely studied this idea of virtual reality, and has he'll have a lot of interesting things to say about it.
Oh, wonderful. I'm so looking forward to getting to experience him. And so Donald and Rizwan are in the sort of scientific realm looking at a model of reality. And another person you've invited is more on the subjective kind of quality of consciousness realm, which is Peter Sage. And I understand he's a friend of yours, and he's a motivational speaker, a serial entrepreneur, an author, a philosopher, and a teacher. And he's best known for his expertise in analyzing human behavior, self-mastery, and strategic and therapeutic interventions. He has authored 2 best-selling books, and he's a global public speaker, very dynamic guy, and he addresses topics related to the quality of our consciousness and emotional maturity, related to how our lives unfold. So share with us what you're excited about with Peter Sage.
Okay. Well, with Peter, his work isn't in the science of what reality is like. He takes the concept of consciousness being fundamental and says, how does this apply to people? How does this apply to your everyday life? What does this mean to you? And how do you, by understanding the nature of reality and consciousness, how do you optimize your life, your ability, your job, your relationships? So he talks about the application of these ideas to real world what problems, real world relationships. So that's his focus, and his motivation is to help people. His motivation is to say things to enough people to help them get thinking on their own, to see some ways that they have been have self-defeating ideas, have ideas that are holding them back, have ideas that are not beneficial for them, and that they could outgrow those. Outgrow, some of them are just fears, some of them are just misconceptions. So he works with individuals and he works with groups. Every once in a while, I'll pop into one of his groups and talk a little bit. He's come to several of my workshops and sessions. So he's a great guy. As you say, he's very dynamic and he's an inspirational speaker. So I can guarantee that if you listen to what he has to say, you'll come out feeling good, feeling renewed, and with a whole new set of, I'm going to do this and I'm going to make this work for me. And he will pump you up and send you off with ideas and ways to make life become more satisfying and more successful for you. So he's the guy that answers the what does it matter? Why should you care?
Mm-hmm. Very exciting. I feel like pumped up just hearing you describe him. Now, I want to pivot to somebody who's coming that is actually associated with the sort of origin of your exploration of consciousness. This is Paul Citarella. He is going to be joining you from the Monroe Institute, which is the world's leading education center for the study of human consciousness and the exploration of altered states of consciousness through disciplined meditative practices and with no recourse to substances. You were foundational in the development of this institute. So it's really exciting they're going to be joining this event. Can you talk to us about that?
Yes. Now Paul's going to be filling in what I guess the listeners have kind of or should have realized at this point of what's missing. What's the missing link? We have people talking about the science, people talking about why does it matter, people talking about the possibilities. And what Paul is going to bring to this is actually doing it, practicing it, not talking about it, but doing it. So he's going to come and run, well, we could say some meditative experiences, but basically he's going to give people some binaural beats, some sound audio that is produced and created at TMI. So you'll be listening to their audio, and it's going to help you actually experience consciousness from the inside rather than the outside, not to experience it intellectually, but experience it intuitively to where you will not be in this reality anymore. You will end up in some other reality. And that personal experience of being able to move out of the physical universe and into other reality systems that exist with your mind that gives you confidence that there is really something to this idea that consciousness is fundamental, that these consciousness realms, the larger conscious system, does actually exist because you can visit it and you can experience it. So he brings the kind of um, the last piece that was missing, which is, okay, you're hearing about it, now go do it and experience it. And there will be a lot of people who will probably, for the first time in their life, experience the non-physical world of consciousness. And for many, that's going to be a big deal because they've read about it, heard about it, talked about it, but they've never actually experienced it. And many will have tried to experience it, but not been successful. And if you listen to the sounds that Paul's going to bring, I'd say there's a good chance that you will experience it with Paul. Now, he's just going to be running these sessions the whole time. So he'll run one, it'll take maybe 30 minutes or 40 minutes, and when that's done, he'll be ready to fill up all of his chairs and headsets with with new people, and when that's done, he'll fill them up with new people. So it's going to be a continuous thing, not just like three things, at this time, and that time, but it's going to be running continuously throughout the whole symposium. He will
Yeah, it's
be there
just
for it.
wonderful that, the
Yeah,
institute's going to have their little mini institute at the symposium,
yeah,
their own dedicated room with these wonderful gravity chairs. You can get really comfortable, like you said, put on the headset, go on an immersive journey with binaural beats, which I understand you helped develop, and I had heard about binaural beats for, years and didn't, it was so kind of interesting to learn that that was something that you helped
I
bring into
did.
the world. Yeah.
Yeah, myself and a friend of mine, Dennis Menerick, were started working with Bob Monroe in really 1971 is when we started, but it was the fall of 71. So most of the whole year 72, and for me, for almost a decade afterward, put many, many hours, 15 to 20 hours a week with Bob, learning to explore the larger consciousness system. And one of the things that we came up with, actually, Dennis found an article in an old Scientific American that looked at binaural beats and showed that they did indeed entrain brainwaves. What that means is your brainwaves tend to follow whatever the frequency the beats are. So you change the frequency of the binaural beat, and your brainwaves start outputting in that frequency. That's called brainwave entrainment. And we thought, wow, that might be a good tool. We were just trying everything at the time at Bob's to try to get a handle on consciousness and how do you measure and how do you experience it, how do you experience it, how do you get other people to experience it. And actually, Bob was out of town for that week for 2 weeks. He was at Esalen on the West Coast giving a program. So Dennis and I played with it and optimized it and tried all kinds of waveforms and all kinds of frequencies and found that something that worked really, really well. And Bob integrated that into the sound that he already had, and it made his sound more effective than it was. When I do my courses, I just use plain binaural beats. I don't have any other sounds mixed in with it, but they are very effective. And what they do is a person who has not meditated or who meditates only very infrequently or is not really very good at it. In other words, to be good at meditation, you have to be able to remove all thoughts from your mind and keep them removed for, say, half an hour or an hour, not have any thoughts intrude.
Right.
Most people find that very difficult. They go
Most
about,
people.
yeah, they get about 2 or 3 minutes and a thought pops in, and then maybe eventually 5 minutes of thought pops in. But
5 minutes would be a long time for most people.
yeah,
Yeah.
our minds are usually very busy. So to do that and have that skill takes about 10 years. When I was at Bob Monroe's, there was a group of monks, Tibetan monks, that were coming just, they had been touring and they heard about Bob, so they came and we put them in the lab and gave them the binaural beats. And their assessment of it was that that automatically put them in about the same place that they got to after about 10 years. So it gives you a meditation space that is about like a 10-year veteran in a monastery. So it's
Wow.
probably 10 or 15 years for the average person, working on their meditation. And it kind of gives you that. It puts you there and holds you there so that you can maintain that for 50 minutes or a long period of time. So that's the advantage of binaural beats. And they work very well. They work on almost everybody. There's very few people that the binaural beats, don't help. Some
Mm.
people just don't like to listen to them. They are annoyed by them. But 99% of all the people that I have got, probably 99.99, very rarely does somebody have a problem with binaural beats. They just work. They're not intrusive. They don't enforce you to do anything. You have to cooperate with them. If you don't cooperate with them, then you can nullify the effect if you want to. So it's not that something's done to you. It's just something that helps you do
Helps.
what you want to do, which is to
Right.
have a good meditation state. And meditation basically creates the discipline that you need with your mind and with your consciousness in order to do things like travel around in the larger consciousness system. That requires a certain amount of discipline. And the way traditionally you gain that discipline is through meditation.
Well, and so it's beautiful. We'll have the symposium will have this dedicated space run by the Monroe
Hmm.
Institute. If you've never experienced binaural beats, never had one of these traveling experiences in the larger system, you might get to experience that at the symposium this autumn. And so, along those lines, I want to pivot and talk a bit about another aspect of this symposium that you touched on in your introduction, in the spirit of Einstein's wonderful maxim that imagination is more important than knowledge. There is going to be a very special dedicated space for this event, and it's called the Imaginarium. And all kinds of playful, creative consciousness explorations will be offered through music, movement, meditation, and more. So, for an example, we've got the Monroe Institute in one room, and then in a separate room, there's going to be daily facilitated dance sessions with beautiful curated music. People just can be joyful and celebrate. There'll be Kundalini yoga happening every day. There's going to be an experience of Tom's Park, which is another consciousness exploration tool that you created. And I hear that the Monroe Institute is hoping to have developed a 3D version of it. No guarantees, but that's something to
Hmm.
perhaps look forward to. We're also hoping to have some sessions, some Q&A demonstrations with AI Guy. And so you want to say a little bit about AI Guy, Tom?
Well, yes, I'll say that. And one other thing we're going to have in that room, since we're on the subject of that room, let me say that first. We're going to have a inventor, musician, all around
Oh, yeah,
smart,
Brian
smart.
Forbes, yes.
Yeah, Brian Forbes, all around smart guy, going to come there, and he's going to put a little strip across your forehead, which reads your brainwaves, and then
Mhm.
he's going to convert that into music, where each particular frequency of your brainwave gets associated with an instrument and a few other things. And if your mind is busy and rattled and jumping around, so will the music be busy and wild and jumping around.
Mhm.
And if you put your mind in a state that's serene and beautiful, the music will be serene and beautiful. So it's an interesting thing that he has invented and done, and he's going to be there and
Let
helping
me say a
people
little bit.
experience that.
Let me say a little bit about Brian because he was really I had heard about this making music from our brain waves, and when I checked him out, he's a Grammy award winning music producer, and he's a multi instrumentalist. He plays many instruments, and he's co-founded this company Nextvox, which created this AI based neuro immersive technology that you're talking about. And he also uses it. It's like a combination of music therapy, neurofeedback, and meditation. And so not only do you get to hear the music of your brain, but he's developing a way for people to use it so they can actually rewire their brain into healthier patterns, which I find fascinating.
Yeah. Well, it also gives you a wonderful feedback tool
Mm.
for relaxing and letting go and achieving that meditation state without actually having to go through discipline of meditation. You can just listen to the music and then modify your thoughts and what you're feeling and your attitude so that the music gets nicer and smoother and flows better. So
Mm.
it's a great feedback device because some people, when you say, well, just sit down in a chair and don't have thoughts, that's kind of a foreign thing to do. But to make music with your mind, that's more of a natural thing to do. So I think it has a lot of potential as a feedback machine for people to learn to relax and get themselves into a good meditation state, gain that mental discipline in a way that's fun, entertaining, and not so difficult as the usual way of sitting down and clearing your mind of thoughts and keeping it that way. That's a big problem for most of us, particularly in Western culture where we're busy, busy, busy all the time. Our minds are going all day long. So I think it has a lot of potential and it's fun. I did that. I was with Brian in Costa Rica about, I don't know, 5 or 6 months ago, and I put the thing on, and it was a real interesting experience. I enjoyed it. So I tried to locate Brian and ask him if he wouldn't come because I know people are going to be really amazed and have a lot of fun with this invention of his. And yes, he is also a wonderful musician, and hopefully we'll get him to play some for us. And
Yeah,
his,
and actually
yeah,
speaking of that, he's bringing with him, or his, I believe his partner, and
yes,
Masha Brodskaya, who is a classically trained violinist, a producer, an educator, and an entrepreneur known as Ambe. She's really dynamic performer and a VR pioneer who merges classical performance, neuroscience, and holistic body practices into a pretty wild experience. The pictures I've seen, she calls herself a violin Borg, and it's sure to be an incredible
yeah.
experience.
I have heard her play the cello, something a little smaller than a bass, but much bigger than a violin, the cello. And she was probably the best that I have ever heard. Her quality of what she produces, the sound she produces, is just marvelous. It's you I can't describe it. You have to just listen to her to get what I'm saying, but she is not just good, she's way past good.
Mm.
So if she will play for us, you will, I'm sure, find that to be a peak experience all by itself, just listening to her play the cello.
Well,
She's very
that is a
talented.
beautiful, tempting image and invitation to sort of begin to wrap up this interview. Hopefully, people will see how compelling this symposium is going to be with incredible, intellectual discussion and all these creative ways to engage consciousness. And it's all going to happen September 29th through October 3rd. You can see it right there in Huntsville, Alabama, which is known as Rocket City. And I think the location is really meaningful based on your work because, Rocket City, Huntsville, Alabama, brought us the Saturn's V rocket that took us to the moon. And all the way back in 1969, Neil Armstrong said, "One giant step for man, one giant leap for mankind." And I think, Thomas, your work and this symposium is really pointing to the real giant leap that we need to take, which is an entirely different paradigm of understanding the nature of reality.
Yes, I think the people who come will be surprised at the cosmopolitan nature of this little mid-sized city in Alabama. We have a large, German population, Korean population, Indian population. Uh, People come from all over the world to live and work here.
Mm.
One, because it's a very nice place and has a lot of amenities, and two, this is where the action's happening when it comes to rockets and all things technical.
Yeah, and SpaceX, so yeah, so many of the more important things that are taking us to new worlds. So everybody, if you want to have an amazing, mind-blowing, and heart-expanding experience, join us For Doorway to the Future, put on by the Unification of Science and Consciousness, September 29th through October 3rd. You can learn more and purchase tickets at www.doorwaytothefuture.com. You can see it right there. And we do have early bird rates going on right now. And I'm saying we because I'm an MBT volunteer. I'm helping to organize this event. My name's Christine Barrington. Tom, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you about this event. And I'm really looking forward to see, who decides to show up and take part in discovering, what becomes possible when scientific discipline meets big picture reality.
Yes, that's going to be quite an event. I think it'll be fun, educational, and growing for all the attendees. It is one of the first. There's not a lot of things that will bring together all the aspects that we're bringing together. So it's pretty unique in this world to find this kind of combination of science, physics, mind,
Play, dance,
paranormal, yeah,
meditation.
dancing, playing, music from the mind, yeah, and we have a lot of other things going on in that imaginality, that room, imaginarium. That'll be interesting. Just little ways that you can hands-on. It's a place for you to get into things and experience things uh, on your own.
Mm,
So yes, come. It's going to be a lot of fun.
it's going to
Come
be
join us.
Thank you, Tom. It was what a pleasure to talk to you about this wonderful event.
Well, thank you.
See you in September. Bye.
See you then.